Thank you.
Thanks, Anna. Are we ready to start?
It appears so.
Okay. Good morning. I would like to call the meeting to order, the licensing meeting. This meeting of the Board of Chiropractic Examiners Licensing Committee is being held by teleconference pursuant to the statutory provisions of Government Code Section 11133. The date is Friday, December 9th, 2022, and the time is 10:02. The board's paramount responsibility is to protect the health and welfare and safety of the public through licensure, education, and enforcement in chiropractic care. Members of the public may address the committee during the public comment session. Public comments will also be taken on agenda items at the time the item is heard and prior to the committee taking any action of said items. Those who would like to provide public comment will be limited to 3 minutes, unless in the discretion of the committee, circumstances require a longer period. Members of the public will not be permitted to yield their allotted time to other members of the public to make comments. Individuals may appear before the committee to discuss items not on today's agenda. However, the committee may not discuss or take action on these items except to decide whether to place the matter on the agenda for a future meeting. Please be aware that this meeting is being recorded. And also please turn off or silence all cell phones, and we will now take roll. Ms. Cruz, will you take roll?
Yes. Dr. Pamela Daniels.
Present.
Jeanette Cruz, present. All present. Quorum is established.
Thank you. I'd like to go to agenda item 2. And this is to review the committee meeting minutes for October 3rd, 2022. And I can open that up to the committee. I do have one section. Ms. Cruz, do you have any comments or questions on the meeting minutes from October 3rd?
No, I do not.
And does anybody else? So I did have a question on page 4 of 6, top paragraph. It wasn't my recollection, so it's the last sentence of the first paragraph. It says, Ms. Cruz thanked Dr. Daniels for her feedback and perspective on comprehensive patient care and practical clinical experience. My recollection was that that was Ms. Walker, so I'm not sure if I'm remembering that correctly. That's my only edit.
And Dr. Daniels, in response, as during that portion of the discussion, you did provide a pretty comprehensive explanation of the need and the kind of what's behind the clinical experience and how that benefits patients. So that does accurately reflect what occurred. If you have any changes or if you'd like us to re-review it and bring it back, we can, or otherwise we can approve as is.
No, I recollect that. It was just that it says Miss Cruz thanked me, and I believe it was you that thanked me. So it was just a point of the last sentence of the first paragraph.
Okay, then we would need to clarify that in the record and bring it back at the next committee meeting.
This is Sabina. If I may interrupt, we can absolutely approve these minutes with the edit stated as long as it's in the motion.
Okay, so shall I make a motion to approve the meeting minutes from October 3rd, 2022 with the edit of Miss Walker in place of Miss Cruz on page 4 of 6?
Perfect motion.
I second.
Moderator, can you open this item up for public comment?
Certainly. And we've opened up the WebEx Q&A feature to facilitate public comment. If you have a comment on the minutes, you may look for the question mark icon, typically in the lower right of your computer screen, and click on that, type comment in the text box and hit send. The other option is to raise your hand by clicking on the hand icon, and call-in users can use *3 to raise their hand. Are there any comments on the minutes? And I do not see any requests for comment. Shall I close the public comment period?
Yes, please. Thank you.
You're welcome.
And Ms. Cruz, can you call the roll for the vote on this motion?
Yes. Roll for vote. Dr. Daniels,
Yes.
Jeanette Cruz, yes. Motion passes or motion carries.
Great. Thank you. Okay, so at this point, I'd like to move to agenda item number 3 and ask Ms. Walker if she could provide us an update on the board's licensing program.
Sure, thank you. There's a few items I'm going to cover during my update this morning. The first of which is the board, as you recall, the board adopted its 2022 through 2026 strategic plan at the October 27th meeting. And then following that adoption of the strategic plan, staff has been participating in strategic planning action sessions with the department's solid training and planning solutions. And within these sessions, staff has been identifying the specific tasks and actions that staff will be taking to implement each of the objectives that the board has identified within the strategic plan. Once that plan is complete, staff will be sharing that action plan with the board. And there are a number of objectives within the current strategic plan that are specifically assigned to the licensing committee. So our future program updates at the committee meetings will include a status update on each of the objectives that's assigned to the committee, as well as a milestone tracker, so we can track our progress towards meeting each of those objectives. Are there any questions on the strategic plan? At this point, it's very preliminary, but we will have the action plan for the committee at a future meeting.
Okay, great. I love the milestone tracker. Is that going to be computerized, or is that going to be a hard copy, or what does that look like?
So the department's solid solutions has a milestone tracker that they're going to be providing with the action plan. I've yet to see what that is, but I believe it'll meet our needs. And if not, we can supplement it with any additional information the committee may be looking for.
Okay, great. Do we have a estimate of roughly when we can see that, kind of in spring or summer?
I would likely by the January board meeting that we
Okay.
can present the initial action plan with what the tracker is going to look like, and then we'll have updates to include within each committee meeting going from there. I was just informed, our moderator also works for Solid, so she informed me that it'll be in staff's hands by the end of December, so we'll prepare it and bring it forward to the board in January.
Okay, great. Thank you. Ms. Cruz, do you have any questions or comments?
Nope, you asked my exact question.
Okay.
And then, so moving on from the strategic plan, we also have our Connect project. So since the last meeting, we've continued our focus on the system enhancements for the user experience and just to make it easier and more intuitive to navigate. In early October, the prior continuing education upload section was removed from the online application for the DC license renewal process, and it was replaced with the same certification question that's found on the paper renewal notice. With that change, it significantly decreases the amount of time that licensees need to spend in the system completing the renewal process. And it also allows licensees to make their payment and submit their renewal application prior to completion of all of the continuing education requirements, as they're certifying that it'll be done prior to their expiration date. But it allows them to file the application 30 or up to 60 days in advance to ensure that the license is renewed timely. So instead of requiring it as part of the renewal process, we've developed a section that's going to be included on the licensee dashboard where they can store their continuing education records, and then staff has access through the back office to view the records as well. So it's kind of an initial step towards being able to automate our auditing and checking of licensee compliance. But in the meantime, it'll provide a convenient storage option for licensees. Instead of having to maintain their current paper files, they can store their continuing education records directly with the board. The timeline for the next software release that would include these functions is currently, we're looking at mid-January 2023. That timeline is specifically tied to the completion of another area that's being developed to transition all of our cashiering functions to the Connect system. So currently we have a manual process for cashiering any of the paper checks that come into the board, and they're developing a function for us to be able to use the Connect system to create all those, to process all those payments electronically. So with that development, that's really what's driving the current timeline. And we are looking at around mid-January. It is going to require it at this phase, they're still developing that functionality. So it is going to need to be tested, but that's the target that we're shooting for right now with all of these additional enhancements. And with that, we're also working to finalize our documentation on the continuing education provider and course approval processes, so we can begin developing those in the system just beginning after this next software release. Are there any questions on the Connect project?
On the licensing dashboard, so they can file up to 60 days in advance, but they don't have to have completed the CEs. And on the dashboard, is that on the board's dashboard or is that in the Connect system?
It's in so within the Connect system, there's a user dashboard. And right now, that dashboard includes all of the different tabs for every function in the system. What we're doing to enhance the system is that we're cleaning it up and creating multiple tabs across the top so that it's easier to navigate where you're managing your license or you're looking at continuing education records. There's different tabs or a profile tab, just trying to mirror what most people would expect when they log into a system, being able to kind of replicate that same function. And then we're also adding on the right column, there's a variety of board resources that they can get to through either links or getting direct access to the phone numbers that they need to call for the different units or the email addresses. And then in response to your question with the renewal application itself, from the dashboard, they click on a renewal application and it opens an electronic application where they verify that their address information is still correct. They answer the 3 certification questions that are on their paper renewal form, the continuing education question, if they've completed it prior to their expiration date, and then if there's been a conviction or if there's been discipline within the prior license renewal period, and then they submit the online payment. And then from there, the rest of the system the rest of the process is automated, and it takes about 48 hours for the license renewal date to roll forward in our system.
And then once they complete their CEs, are they uploading it? I guess I'm not clear. You probably said it, but are they uploading it to the Connect system or to a different system as far as the record keeping?
Sure. It's so there's no requirement right now that they upload it, but what we're providing is in the Connect system on the dashboard, there's going to be a separate tab for continuing education records to where they'll have the option to upload them directly. So when we get that developed and they get an audit notice in the mail, what they're going to be told is you can either submit your records to us manually or go into your Connect account, upload your records because we'll have direct access and we can take a look from there. It's
okay.
To clarify, the purpose behind that is it's a building block so that when we develop the continuing education provider processes in the system, we can then allow for primary source verification and the providers themselves can upload records and they'll automatically display on the dashboard. So it's really the first step towards being able to actually have the providers be the ones giving us the verification and having it automatically appear on the dashboard.
Okay, gotcha. I just wanted to clarify that the licensees didn't have to unless there was an audit, but moving forward, so kind of similar to what we have now as far as the paper. So that's great. All right.
Correct.
So I don't have any further questions, Ms. Cruz.
Good question. So I'm wondering, I'm already thinking ahead of in the future when we have things, say, I'm trying to find the right word for it. So when we have, I'm just going to call it the mail vote. We have something like that. I imagine this will also help streamline the types of documents we receive. So, right, kind of identify, kind of prevent the opportunity for any kind of duplicates along the way. And so I imagine kind of this kind of starts to feed into that side of the house as well.
It could potentially, if we have enough resources in the project, we could develop something for the board member side. But what it's really building towards is really an accuracy of our CE records because we're going to get them directly from the providers, and it also is the burden of licensees having to deal with audits because the goal is to move towards being able to ensure compliance at the time of renewal through almost a pre-check system.
Yeah, so whether or not it kind of feeds to the board members, it cleans up along the way. So no, I'm hearing you.
Yeah, definitely. We also, within our licensing workload, we have 3 pending regulatory proposals that affect the licensing program. The first of which is covers the requirements for board-approved chiropractic colleges. So under this proposal, the board's seeking to amend the requirements for chiropractic colleges to align with current Council on Chiropractic Education accrediting standards and eliminate any duplicative or overly prescriptive requirements that are currently found in the board's regulations. So this rulemaking package has been, the text has been approved by the board, and staff is currently preparing the package for review by the Department of Consumer Affairs. The second pending regulatory proposal that relates to licensing is the requirement for basic life support certification for all licensees. There is text that was previously approved by the board, but staff does need to make some clarifying edits and changes to that text. And the plan is to potentially return it to the Continuing Education Committee at the January 4th meeting. There's also a third regulatory workload for the Licensing Committee, and that falls under the collection of regulatory proposals under Consumer Protection Enforcement Initiative. Although it's branded as an enforcement matter, some of the regulatory proposals that fell within that area are actually licensing concerns. And the first of which, the Licensing Committee already began its discussions on address filing requirements and defining a place of practice at the last meeting. So that falls within the CPEI, but it's more appropriately placed with the Licensing Committee. So from there, what staff is doing is working on updating the proposal to reflect the committee's discussion at the last meeting, define what a place of practice is, and then make any updates that may be necessary to the text that was previously proposed as part of CPEI. Are there any questions about the regulatory workload for Licensing Committee? And with BLS, it somewhat overlaps with Continuing Education Committee.
Yeah, so on the item number 1, you're referencing that the board approved the language, and are you speaking to the 2018 explanation or regulatory language and the 2020 board approved? Is that
correct? Yeah, there's the language that was approved in July 2020 for the board, and it's actually in the materials for today's meeting as well under agenda item 5. I believe it's attachment 3. That's the text that was approved.
And so is this this language, since it's been approved by a previous board, is this just moving from us to the general board for review and approval, or is there more conversation around that?
So at this point, staff is working on developing all the aspects that are necessary for the rulemaking file or the rulemaking package, and ensuring that we have adequate justification for each of the changes. If we encounter any policy issues, it'll come back to this committee for the board, or this committee for discussion prior to going to the board. If there's no policy issues involved and it's just purely could be some edits to the text, it may go directly to the board for reapproval at a future meeting. So we're wrapping up the internal work that we need to get done on the proposal, and then once we get that done, we can provide you with an update on where the next path is for that proposal.
Okay, and then I think it'll come up a little bit more when we reach agenda item number 5 as well.
Correct. Yeah, if there's any policy issues involved, especially with that text in light of the curriculum requirements, we can raise those, and that if there's a need to bring it back for further discussion at the committee level, we can do that.
I think and number 3 as well, I think will be coming up later in another agenda. So I don't have any specific questions right now. Ms. Cruz?
No, not for this section.
Okay. And then finally, I just want to briefly cover some licensing statistics that we have. If I could ask the moderator to please display the handout for agenda item 3, if we could go to page 3 to begin with.
And as a note, viewers do have the ability to scroll up and down within any given page, but we will advance the pages by the moderators.
Great, thank you. So if we could scroll all the way to the bottom, I've done that on my screen. I'm not sure if everyone's done that on theirs as well. We've captured a snapshot there of the number of licenses and certificates that we've issued through the end of November for this fiscal year. We're currently at 137 Doctor of Chiropractic licenses, 36 corporation certificates, and 738 satellite certificates. So from what we see in that data, the number of DC licenses and corporation certificates is pretty much in line and on trend with what we saw in the prior 2 fiscal years, but we are significantly outpacing the number of satellite certificates that we issued in the prior 2 fiscal years. So we're going to continue to monitor that and see if it's just a matter of licensees filing them towards the beginning of the fiscal year and it may level off, or if that trend is going to continue throughout the rest of the fiscal year. And if we could move to page 4, please. We've also have within the materials there, we have a snapshot of our licensing population by the type. Just as we've seen over the last few fiscal years, we have just the steady decline in the number of Doctor of Chiropractic licenses in the board. The number of corporation certificates has remained relatively steady, and then we're seeing a slight increase in the number of satellite certificates. And some additional data that we put in the report for this committee meeting and that we are planning to expand upon and include in future updates is taking a look at the years that within our licensure population, how many years has everyone been, have there been licensure? And we can see the breakdown in that table of not only active but inactive licenses. We currently have 11,364 licenses that are active, and we have 865 inactive licenses. And the number of licensees and years of licensure is pretty well spread between those falling within 1 to 10 years, 10 to 20 years, and then looking in 20 to 30 years and 30 to 40. You do see that there's a significant portion of the licensed population, almost a quarter, has been licensed for over 30 years, approaching 40 years. And then we've got 7.5% of licensees that have been licensed over 40 years. So while there is a good spread there of the number of licensees, we are seeing it a little bit skewed towards the licensed population that's been licensed for a long period of time compared to those that have been recently licensed. We also included in the materials, just for the committee's information, a breakdown of the Doctors of Chiropractic by county. That information itself is also pretty telling. As you can see, certain areas, there's a high concentration of licensees in the Los Angeles and Orange County areas, followed by San Diego, and then our Bay Area counties. And there's not too many licensees when you start looking into some of the more rural areas within California. So this is just kind of an initial snapshot of some data that we put together using our Qbert system that allows us to manipulate and come up with a lot better data on our licensing population. And we will continue kind of refining it and coming up with some other data that we can provide to the committee at future meetings. So are there any questions on the data?
Yes, well, and a comment. Thank you so much. This information is really helpful. So I appreciate you guys doing that. So thank you. And I'm just wondering it's very telling. I mean, we have many of the licensees in California that have been practicing for quite a while, and potentially a large number getting close to perhaps being in the inactive status, whether, we're not spring chickens anymore. And so those numbers kind of are a little concerning to me. We really just, there's less of the newer chiropractors as far as numbers. We have a large chunk that have been practicing for a while, potentially moving into that inactive status. And so I'm just wondering, as far as licensing and fees and just the overall health of the profession, if you guys have any conversation around that, or if this has been discussed before. I'm not sure there's anything to necessarily do about it right now, but I'd like your kind of feedback on that.
Sure. So I think in the past, we haven't put this much detail into the data to be able to start really coming to conclusions and coming up with any recommended actions. And I think that's where this is kind of a starting point for us, and that especially under, I believe it's the agenda item later today on inactive licenses, we need to start that conversation because the data itself, I mean, it tells you what you can, it's apparent from looking at it that we do have, it appears to be a higher population that's getting ready to either exit the profession or retire or move into more of an inactive role versus those coming in. And how do we kind of counter that, or how do we ensure that people have adequate access to chiropractic in California? This also ties into the issue of reciprocity. If there's any barriers there that are making it more difficult to be licensed in California. And I would say some data that we'd like to bring back for a future discussion, in addition to the reciprocity, or when we get to the reciprocity, is looking at our out-of-state population and tracking the movement and where the most common states that they're going, and seeing where there's comparisons and differences between California and those states for licensure standards.
Great, thank you. Yeah, and I love the number on the inactive. I think that'll be great for the conversation on the next agenda. So it was, it's definitely not inconsequential as far as the number goes. Ms. Cruz, do you have any questions, comments?
Yeah, no, this is great information. When I was looking at the information, I was already like visualizing the histogram. I was like, okay, it skews a little right. It's right. I was like kind of more on that time horizon there. I'm also wondering, in terms of looking for patterns here, that if there is even a preference of license type by each of these time horizons, right? Are we finding that kind of our newer licensees have a preference of one type of license over the other, that may also kind of lead to trends of either the type of communications we want to put out, but also kind of where we may see the industry going as well, or the profession in general going as well. So in my head, I was just imagining a pivot, kind of inactive even versus active by license type by time horizon.
Sure. And one data point that we plan to bring back at the next committee meeting that I think would be worthwhile to look at, especially at years of licensure, is what this captures right here is a snapshot right now. But if we can pull similar snapshots at different intervals and put that all together, analyze it, present that as a graph, I think that could be telling as well to see, are we seeing the trend of, 5 or 10 years ago, there was a set time frame. It's like, is the numbers progressing as they age, or are we getting more of a population? If we were to look at a snapshot 5 or 10 years ago, would it be comparable, or would we see the people that are now in the 30 to 40 bracket were probably right there in 20 to 30? So that's something we want to take a closer look at and bring it back to the committee for a more formal discussion on the statistics.
Yeah, and I think even just expanding it to kind of what you were saying about details around reciprocity, I think, yes, that will also be very telling.
Ms. Walker, do we have any information comparing these numbers to like other boards, acupuncture, physical therapy, et cetera? I know a lot of the other professions seem to be growing while ours is declining. So I just didn't know if we have access to similar numbers.
We should be able to get them. So they generally, with the other boards, they report out their licensure population in terms of numbers, but the system that we got this data from is a shared system across the department. So I can work with the other boards to get a similar breakdown of just high level data similar to this, so we could do a comparison.
Yeah, I think that would be helpful. I mean, not killing ourselves to get the information, but if it's there, utilizing that to sort of compare, and then looking into perhaps reasons why, and if there is anything to adjust.
The question, have we, because I know kind of there's we do have those relationships with the different colleges, but also the different associations. I'm wondering if kind of we've had those conversations with the different associations around even kind of I'm thinking geographically and looking at the kind of by county numbers just to understand and see kind of what a little bit of the why, right? Just kind of get some context around the numbers of why a certain percentage kind of areas might have a higher percentage of inactive versus active. So
Yeah, I think we haven't had those discussions recently, but I do, there's value there, and we can definitely get those back on agendas and bring some of those parties to the table to discuss this issue.
So would we want to later put that potentially on a future agenda item as far as reaching out to the different associations and schools and getting more information as to the pattern and any information that they're seeing with licensing?
Correct. Yeah, we could put that as a future agenda item. We do take notes of any of the requests by the committee during the meeting. So even if it's not formally listed as a future agenda item, we will bring it back up to the chair for consideration at a future meeting.
Okay, great. Thank you. And Ms. Walker, did you have more on the agenda item number 3?
No, that concluded my update. So we could move to public comment.
Okay, great. Moderator, can you open this agenda item up to public comment, please?
Certainly. And we are opening up WebEx's Q&A function to facilitate public comment. If you'd like to make a comment, you can look for the question mark icon, type the word comment into the text box and click send, or you may raise your hand by clicking on the hand icon. If you're on a mobile device, the hand is behind the 3-dot other options. And if you are a call-in user, you can press *3 to raise your hand. We do have a hand raised from someone logged into WebEx as Victor Tong. Victor, I'm sending you a request to unmute your microphone, and you will have 3 minutes to speak with a 30-second warning. And did you get a pop-up on your screen, Victor? You're unmuted. But we're not hearing your voice yet. Oh, there you go. Yes, go ahead.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, I just could not see the bottom part of the page that displayed the county. I think it was cut off. There was 2 pages there, so it would be helpful if we can see the stat, not just on the county that is on the first part of the alphabet. I only see up to Lake County. I couldn't see anything below that. I just would like to see that if it is possible.
And it looks like we have no further requests for public comment. Shall I close the public comment feature?
Yes, please.
Thank you.
This is Sabina, if I can interrupt real quick on that memo. I believe that memo is part of the meeting materials accessible on the board's website. Am I correct?
The handout will be posted by tomorrow. So, and we can also send it directly to Dr. Tong as well.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Okay, so any other comments on agenda item number 3 before we move on to agenda item number 4? Hearing none, let's move on to agenda item number 4. And this is to review and discuss possible recommendations regarding the application for a new chiropractic college approval by Kaiser University. And so this one, I'd like to hand it off to Ms. Walker. Do we have the representatives of Kaiser University with us? And
We do. We have Dr. Isles on the line, and then Dr. Isles, we're having trouble identifying. Is Lisa also on the line?
Yes, President Lisa Nucci should be calling in, and if not, because she could not access the browser, but she should be a call-in user.
And someone in the call-in users has raised their hand. Call-in user 3, if you would hit *6 to unmute yourself, we can be able to verify that you are Lisa Nucci.
Hi, yes. Good morning, everyone. This is Lisa Nucci. I'm the president of Kaiser University, West Palm Beach campus.
Thank you.
Okay, so I'm going to provide a brief introduction, and then I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Isles and Lisa Nucci. So over the summer, the board did receive an application for a new chiropractic college approval from Kaiser University College of Chiropractic Medicine's Doctor of Chiropractic degree program that is being offered at their main campus in West Palm Beach, Florida. Their DC program has been accredited by the Council on Chiropractic Education, but it requires approval by the board for their graduates to be eligible for licensure in California. The committee initially discussed the application at the October 3rd meeting and identified 4 deviations or deficiencies in the application as it was presented. So here with us today is Dr. Jennifer Isles, Vice President of the College of Chiropractic Medicine, and Lisa Nucci, President of the West Palm Beach campus. They're going to be providing us with a brief overview of the program and their responses to the issues that were initially identified in October. And then after those issues have been addressed by the program, the staff recommendation is for the committee to recommend to the board that Kaiser's Doctor of Chiropractic degree program be granted provisional approval. So with that, I would like to ask Dr. Jennifer Isles and Lisa Nucci to introduce themselves and address the committee.
Thank you very much. My name is Dr. Jennifer Illes, and I am the Vice President of the Kaiser University College of Chiropractic Medicine, and joining me as our campus president, and that again is Ms. Lisa Nucci.
Good morning again, everyone.
I do apologize. I tried to start my video. I'm not sure if that was locked feature, but if needed, I can retry, but I'm sure you can hear me all clearly, I hope.
You're welcome to retry as well.
Okay, thank you. I did, and it talks about some browser issues, so I do apologize on that, but I am ready to go for the camera. How would you like me to start? Do you want to go one by one for the 4 deficiencies and provide updates with these, or is there going to be a formality where somebody reads number 1 and then I respond?
I think this is Dr. Daniels. For me, I think just going through the 4 deficiencies, I think you can just kind of run with that, and then we can ask for questions and clarifications or comments after, if that's okay, Ms. Walker.
Yeah, that sounds like a good plan.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Daniels and Ms. Walker. I appreciate the board's time today to listen to us. We have been working hard at the campus. We have 150 students. We started in 2016, and we're going strong here. So again, thank you all for your time. The number 1 deficiency found was a lack of physiology labs, and then the 660 hours of electives. So with respect to the physiology labs, a schedule for winter 2023 and the documentation, if requested from the board, can be provided after this meeting or thereafter, has included Physio 1 and 2, which are our main physio classes, to include laboratory hours. Physio 1 is held in semester 1. It's a 3-credit class. That means there'll be 1 hour of lecture accompanied by 2 hours of weekly lab every week for 16 weeks. In semester 2, we will have Physiology 2, which will include the same course credits. That's 3 course credits. 1 hour would be lab, and going with the ratio of 1 hour of lab for 1 credit and 2 hours of lab for 1 credit, we will have 2 hours of physio lab. So we will have 3 course credits for physio lab, Physio 1, which includes lab, and Physio 2, which now includes lab. This proposal has been approved at the level of the campus president, who is with us today. With respect to our elective hours, as indicated in our application, we had some initial challenges with being a brand new program. We are 6 years old. We were focused on the core curriculum at the time. We have accordingly approximately 4,675 hours. When we include multiple lab sessions, this includes over 5,500 hours. So we are above 275 hours above the state's requirement, and as you know, CCE, the 4,200 hours, well over that. Including an additional 660 hours on top of the 4,600 plus hours we have now would be quite substantial change to our curriculum, quite a substantial change to our student schedule, as our students are already in the maximum, as per your board, 35 hours a week of class schedules. Now, a recommendation was made, and this was brought up at a faculty meeting as well. We have our faculty collaborate on these type of things to help create action plans. We can take some of the classes that we currently have in our core curriculum and simply rename them as an elective. By doing so, we can easily get 480 hours of those electives. Some of these classes would include things like geriatrics, contemporary health practices, pharmacology, etc. Again, documentation to be provided after this could be rendered to the board. Any questions with number 1 before I go to 2?
None for me.
All right.
I think my question may be for kind of even clarification from Dr. Daniels. Would you say that the kind of those types of electives are, I was like, similar to what you've seen in other chiropractic colleges, or in your own, in your past?
Yes, I would actually be really interested in just seeing the having that core curriculum provided. I think it's Dr. Ellis, it sounds like you have many of them, but it's a name or a designation. So, you know, geriatrics, pharmacology, definitely part of those essential electives. So it sounds like they're there. It just seems to be an organizational thing, but I think seeing the actual classes would be helpful as well. But yes,
Okay.
they're in line.
Thank you.
Thank you. Number 2, this is with respect to several things. The first thing I'd like to discuss is the written interpretation of at least 30 X-ray views. Unfortunately, a clarification should have been provided. I had spoken to the faculty once this list of deficiencies was produced, and the imaging professor, who's a DAC radiologist, there are 5 series of diagnostic imaging classes in our curriculum. So we have 74 classes, 5 of them are diagnostic imaging. Unfortunately, within the syllabi, although it's being done in the coursework, we are meeting the CCE and the California board requirements of the 30 interpretations. The syllabi for the winter 2023 have been updated to include written documentation of this. However, verbally from the instructor, he had been doing this since the classes has first started. This was not any sort of recent change. And unfortunately, there has been some training with syllabi given to our faculty to provide clarity to this area. So the 30 X-ray views, it's actually more, 30 X-ray views, 15 of them are done in our last semester, which is semester 10. It's clinic. Semester 9 is also clinic, and 15 are included. The other diagnostic imaging classes, which is 1, 2, 3, and 4, have what are called 5 mini RAD reports. So it's an interpretation of different views, including spinal and extraspinal views. So there's actually 20 additional views. So our program has 50 radiological views. This is not new or added. It has just simply not been clarified in the syllabi appropriately. With respect to our practical hours, the 518 practical clinical hours, we actually have 900 plus clinical hours. Again, a matter of clarity. Myself, I was a new administrator that came on in January, writing a self-study report to the CCE, which was due in March. And unfortunately, this was just overseen with respect to the hours. The syllabi can be provided. It has been this way since the inception of the program as well, the well over 900 hours. That includes 180 hours in semester 8 clinically, in semester 9, 300 clinical hours, and in semester 10, there's 450 clinical hours. Semester 10 is also known as an externship, where the student may be going on externship to a VA, the Department of Defense location we have in Arizona, or to a community partner. So we do meet the 518 hours of clinical practice and has been clarified and documented appropriately in both our clinical manual and the syllabi related to those clinical classes. The last portion of number 2 was the 215 patient treatments, and that we do not quantify that, and that is a true statement and currently still is a true statement. We have had an action plan to identify whether or not this is something we wanted to persist with and go forward with. And we're really waiting on the response of course, California board, because we do know from having a site visit recently, the CCE is going to be potentially restructuring quantitative numbers as well. Our clinic is 3 years old, and at the beginning, we did not put a quantifiable number on our patient treatments and or encounters, simply due to the fact that it may not have been quite honestly possible for our graduates to meet that requirement. However, every one of our student interns starting in semester 8 do receive 93 assessments at least on, and that means 3 different assessments on every one of the 31 meta competency outcomes that the CCE requires for accreditation. So although we do not have truly a quantitative number, we do have our 93 assessments per intern, per student going through, and if they aren't meeting these benchmarks, then they either, we have a remediation plan, and if they do not remediate appropriately in an appropriate time frame, they will fail the clinical section and have to repeat, which we've had a couple students do. So we still have high qualifiers and quantifiers for a clinic, but we currently do not have that 250 patient treatment. Our clinic sees approximately 150 patient treatments every single week with about 34 to 40 interns right now. Of course, we're rotating into a new cohort in January. So every student is seeing at least a patient a day. And so when we add up those numbers, it's close to that 250 patient treatments. It's more likely to reach the encounters portion than the actual patient treatment portion. If necessary, we are willing to do what it takes to get certification. So if there is, a hard set fast rule on this 250 patient treatments, we will add this as an action plan, bring it to our curriculum committee and also our clinical services committee for review, and then place this into our clinical manual. Any questions on number 2?
Hi, Dr. Ellis. It's Dr. Daniels.
Hi, Dr. Daniels.
Thank you so much for the clarification. Sounds great. I did have a question on the 250 patient treatments. What is, because patient treatments or / visits in the CCE is defined by 3 different categories to equate to 1 visit, and one of those components being the adjustment. Can you just tell me a little bit more about what your guys' definition of an assessment is, and how many adjustments are the students actually performing? Like, do you know, and how are you guys measuring the adjusting portion, being competent at adjusting?
Okay, that's a great question. So there are 8 main meta competencies that the CCE uses, and meta competency number 7 is the manipulation portion. So according to their CCE's white paper and best practices, that each one of those subcategories within that meta competency, so in this case number 7, must be assessed at least 3 different times with 3 different assessment tools. So we have revised our tools. We have a whole new set of tools to meet that 3 different assessments on each one of those meta competencies. So that means that each student every semester, we have 3 different clinical semesters, is being assessed on just simply their manipulation at least 30 times. Now, the student is seeing and having more manipulations. We have one student that's seeing 10 patients a day right now. Not each patient is being manipulated per se. Our definition of manipulation includes we use Cox flexion distraction, we use Thompson drop, we use diversified, and we use spring instrumentation. We do not call it activator because we are not doing the activator protocol, but if needed, we use the spring instrument to manipulate if the patient wants or pending contraindications for spinal manipulation. So that right now is included on our list of manipulations or adjustments. Does that help a little bit?
Yeah, it definitely helps. I'm just trying to get a better picture. You were saying the manipulation, 30 times. And so if we just go back to, I mean, it's, there's, which will be a conversation later as well in agenda item number 5. It's not just about the number of hours. Doesn't mean that someone is competent, clearly. But there is something to numbers. An example, like the AMA is moving away from numbers of years, but moving towards something called EPAs. And because there's a gap between medical school and residency, and they were finding that the students were not competent in certain sort of execution of exam, et cetera. And so it sort of reminds me a little bit of chiropractors. And so if we take California's standard of 250 patient treatments, that was really 250 adjustments or manipulations, because that was included. So what are you finding with the cohorts that you've had go through, as far as how are you measuring their competency with each type of manipulation? And are the ones that you mentioned, they sound like their core is each student doing 30 of each of those? If you could just talk to me a little bit more about what that looks like.
Sure. So I'm just pulled up one of our, so we have a quality assurance coordinator here whose job is to essentially take the rubrics from the clinicians we have. And we've actually have structured our clinic from 1 clinician in 2021 to now 4 clinicians in 2022, with an additional hire budgeted for 2023, based upon the amount of patient volume we have and the amount of assessments that we'll be doing going forward in 2023. So just to clarify with Metacompetency 7, because I don't have all the 31 outcomes memorized, but I do have all the 8 Metacompetency memorized. There are 5 different Metacompetency outcomes related to the manipulation. That include, for example, finding a palpable lesion, subluxation, whatever we call it, somatic dysfunction, and then additionally, the actual manipulation itself and the reassessment. So I think not only just the actual delivery of a high velocity, low amplitude move, or a low velocity, low amplitude move in case of a pediatric or potentially aging adult, is the pre-setup and pre-assessment. So if you consider each one of those 5 metacompetencies, we measure them at least 30 times each. So really, 3 times each. So 3 times 5. So we're looking at each of those is 15, and at 3 times of those. So we're looking at 45 different assessments per se for just Metacompetency 7, which again is relatable to the all things adjustments in the CCE. I've asked our clinician to give us numbers in terms of averages for how many patient manipulations have been done with different variety of tools, as you've asked, like including coxflexion distraction, HVLA. And unfortunately, that data had not been collected, but it's an agenda item starting in 2023. So again, our clinic's 3 years old. There's there's been a lot of great things we've had, but we've found some things that need to be shored up on. And again, qualifying the type of manipulation is something we haven't done yet. We've all just included it into a manipulation. However, the clinicians, because there's only 24 max per cohort, and each clinician is responsible for every single cohort to allow for different inter-examiner assessments. And they actually will say subjectively to the student, why don't we try manipulation? Or, if we find that a student often uses coxflexion distraction, we will, and there's, no reason for them not to use HVLA. Our core program is based upon the manipulative HVLA or diversified care. So most of our manipulations are in the form of HVLA, approximately 80%, but we don't have numbers right now to support that. That's based upon the subjective quantification of our clinicians.
And I think part of, and correct me if I'm wrong, falling short of the numbers being a new school and being smaller and the students really just not having access to being able to get those treatments or hours. Is that correct?
It's not a matter anymore. I think previously that was a challenge with, you know, we just started up social media, so that brought in a lot more. We are now Medicare. We have our PTAN number, the providers do. We're looking at taking on insurance as well, because the first, basically, the first year almost, we were in COVID. As you all know, that was a challenge for our clinic. We had to do telemedicine. So you can imagine that for the first couple of years, we had some challenges obtaining 250 patient treatments, or you know, showing that they were doing the manipulation. We have a lot of meeting minute notes in which we started to you know, get back into the clinic. So our clinic was only closed down for about 8 months during the COVID period, but our school, like most chiropractic institutions, were remote for about 1.5 years. So we had some challenges in the very first years that we opened our clinic, remembering our clinic's only 3 years old. And once we went through that, now we are facing, you know, which is a good challenge, you know, spacing issues in our clinic system. We have a 5-year plan of opening up a new science building at a campus, which is literally probably 5 to 10 minute drive, about 5 miles, 7 miles away, which would include a larger clinical space. Currently, we don't, you know, it's not that we're turning away patients, we are just packed full, which is great. So there's not been an issue with respect to students and student surveys saying we don't have enough patients. It's just, you know, we're full. So we don't have numbers that quantify previous years in terms of how many treatments they're getting, but what I'm getting from the clinicians right now is that each student is graduating with about 300 or plus manipulations. Now that's only for the last year because we added more clinicians. We've been on ground versus remote, but we cannot address that in the first 2 years of operation.
Thank you. So it's not, I mean, you're saying it's no longer an issue as far as the size, and that the students could get 250 treatments if needed.
Yes, we have been considering placing that number in our clinic manual because it is definitely doable. It's not going to be a matter of, ooh, they're not going to meet it. It's more of a matter of which way the CCE is moving, as well as you guys. I know that often, you know, those things go together. So we didn't want to put a number in our 2023 clinic manual, and then a couple of months later, they decide not to use a quantitative number. We also didn't want to decrease our clinical experience by students. I've been a clinician before at Duville College in Buffalo, where we've had some quantitative numbers where students will just treat students. They'll just treat anybody just to get the numbers, and it's not a qualitative experience. So we're putting more on respect of the qualitative experience and quantitative. But like I said, if we need to, it's definitely doable. We just don't want to solidify it if things are going to change.
Understood. And so let me put it this way for you, like say you're a patient and you go to the clinic, and or you're a student and you're in the clinic, and it's very difficult to put numbers on being competent. At the same time, if we don't have any number, then, you know, how are we measuring that becomes the question. So putting yourself in that position, where do you think that falls as far as being competent in manipulation?
Well, we're meeting the rubric tools that we've developed based upon clinical reasoning worksheets and documents that we've created through a clinical assessment plan, and we've created our own benchmarks. For example, maybe I'm not clarifying this well, and I apologize. Previously, because again, our rubrics are going to change in 2023 to be more in depth, but previously, a student would have to complete at least 8 full patient encounters, which include the history, the review of findings, the physical exam, and there would be all these meta-competencies measured with a benchmark. If the benchmark wasn't met, then the student would be remediated. So we created as a program our own number of quantitative assessments to get through every syllabi. So when we talked about competency, it wasn't a matter of completing encounters, it was a matter of completing the assessments which tied into the CCE meta-competencies. I'm not sure if that makes sense.
Yes, it does. Just processing. Thank you.
You're welcome.
And before I ask questions on the other items or open it up to the committee, did you have anything else that you wanted to add as far as comments on the 4 deficiencies or anything else?
The other comments, I would like to just briefly talk about 3 and 4, if that's okay, because I know we didn't get to those yet. I know time is probably we've spent a lot of time, and I don't want to take up the board's and the public's time.
Well, it's
but
important. Go ahead.
Okay, for number 3, with respect to 90% of time, and that is true, our Kaiser University, we have 20 different campuses throughout not only Florida, but also internationally. And currently their grad and undergrad catalog require 80% attendance. Now in clinic, I do want to mention that in the clinic syllabi that's been, again, in existence for the last 3 years, it's a 90% attendance, because we want to make sure that, you know, we are getting the most of their time, that they aren't skipping 20% in clinic. So we do actually have, for 3 clinical classes in which they're getting their clinical hours, they have to be present for at least 90%. Now this is based on a time in, time out sheet. The time in, time out sheet is held by the clinician. The student signs their name beside their name, and then it's input into our learning management system called Blackboard. If the board requires us to change attendance, we are able to do so. However, I just wanted to put this out there, as I did in the application, that we've had students that may have 90 to 100% attendance, but just not meet our technical standards of the program. What does that mean? That means that they may not have appropriate psychomotor skills. They may not have appropriate cognitive and or social behaviors. And so we didn't want to put change the entire institution's attendance policy at this point. If we can discuss more on that, but it is a possibility. But right now, all classes except for clinic are 80% attendance. And again, regardless, even if they meet 100% attendance, they still may be academically dismissed from the program for not meeting our technical standards, which are included in the document, the application that was sent. And last one is the number 4 about the clinical experience in psychological counseling. In the state of Florida, where our school is housed, we do not diagnose DSM-5 psychological disorders. However, of course, they're very important in creating proper management and care for our or referral to people in this area, like social workers, psychiatrists, psychologists. I do want to mention that we have multiple different classes, and I can provide documentation to this after, that include psychological education, and these include contemporary health topics, pharmacology, our systems class, which includes a psychological unit, our geriatric class, which talks about major depressive disorder and anxiety disorders. We also, in our women's health and peds class, which is currently not an elective but could become one, have a coalition group called Healthy Mother, Healthy Babies from Palm Beach County. They come in and give our students maternal mental health training for about 2 hours. And we also have a bi-weekly, grand rounds in which concussion and psychological topics are covered. So when I add up about 6 of these classes, they probably equate to about the 32 hours, although we do not have a true class. If necessary, because again, we care most about our students, we can create an elective class for this, but these topics are covered in multiple classes throughout our curriculum. And that's all I have.
Okay, great. Thank you. I did have a question. I was just curious, why did the college pick 80% attendance versus the 90? Was there a reason behind that? Did I miss it?
The main reason is we're trying to align ourselves with the policies and procedures of the institution. So we are a program, and in fact, on the West Palm Beach campus, we're one of 18 programs. So for example, and other allied health programs like nursing, they have an 80% attendance. Rad Tech, 80%. So we aligned ourselves with what the institution's program was doing. So programmatically, we did 80%. But when we got the clinic and we were considering, of course, changing this for California, we started in our clinical system with the 90%. Changing to 90% programmatically requires a substantive change, and we just weren't ready to do that with our self-study report and site team visit happening in all of 2022. However, if necessary, it can be changed going forward in 2023.
Okay, great, thanks. And is there anything in your core curriculum for dermatology?
Currently, we do not have its own standalone. However, for example, we cover in systems dermatology like lupus, SLE. We cover collagen vascular disorders. In geriatrics, we have shingles. There's things in public health that we talk about derm-wise, but not a standalone class yet. But that's something that we've been considering, and we have some faculty that actually have said that they would like to teach that class.
Okay, great. And then just one last question for me. With the CCE best practices, aren't they referring to the triangulation of assessments, like multiple tools and multiple assessors, but not so much the patient encounter or the manipulation?
Yes, they don't talk about that. They just talk about ways of meeting best practices for that. So again, in their world, from what I've understood from our last site visit as well, they're more interested. They've never asked us how many numbers or what we look like. In fact, we showed them a nice chart about our patient volume, and they're like, okay, that's nice. But they were more concerned about, are we meeting the meta competency outcomes, all 31 of them? Are we assessing them on at least every semester 3 times using 3 different tools? That's what their concern was. It had never been a quantitative thing, and our focus had remained, again, just because being a new program, a new administration, on sufficing what we needed to for a site visit.
Got you. Thank you very much. Ms. Cruz, do you have any questions or comments?
Yes, a couple, about 2 or 3. One, I feel like it's probably just a typo. In the list of contacts, I noticed Dr. Levine, what's it called? It mentions I collect medical building services, and I was like, oh, let me look them up. I believe it's billing services, which would make more sense as a. So I just noticed that because I was at first I thought I was like, oh, it's probably related to facilities, but it's not. So notice that. So that was just, I imagine, just a typo, but more towards the content of the information provided. I did have a question. It was more around, I would say it's a combination of the faculty organization section as well as a scholastic regulation. And it was kind of around the topic of, so faculty, it's more discipline and welfare. And then for the scholastic side, it was more around, let me see here, trying to find where it was like a reference to professionalism. And I think kind of the big picture question I have is kind of in both areas, at least in how I was reading it, appeared, at least to me, a bit loose in terms of how do we kind of, I want to say, like I'm trying to find the right words, but in the student section, there is a reference to a code of conduct, but also a reference to professionalism, which at least kind of going through a diversity, equity, inclusion lens, I would say a term that normally stands out because it's up to interpretation, right? So kind of it's a bit loose there. But what was helpful for me is that there was at least a reference to a code of conduct that you can point back to. Where it was a bit looser for me was in the faculty organization under what's it called? 331.10 faculty organization, question 2 in the response of no, I'm sorry, not question 2, question 4 in terms of faculty discipline and welfare. It was just kind of reference to a committee, and I was just wondering, is there a similar code of conduct that is referenced for faculty as there is to students?
There is. We actually have, and I can provide, we have an employee handbook with a code of conduct, which is very similar to the student code of conduct, quite honestly. There's just additional pieces of information in there that aren't in the student, like check your email every day, like those type of things.
Oh yeah, because I guess at least what I was looking for, kind of not being a doctor, is just more of like, what are the levels of accountability that you have? What is the kind of expectations of students? What is the expectations of faculty, right? And just the ability to refer back to, oh yes, there is a code of conduct that we will keep you accountable to.
Yes, there is. And additionally, there is a specific because there's undergrad and grad faculty. So we're a level 6 institution. So we actually have additional expectations for graduate level faculty, including scholarly research. So that may not have been clear there, but I can provide the documents for that if necessary.
I appreciate that. And then I think the other question I have, trying to skip forward, it was more towards the, let me find the section name. I think it was just physical facilities, section 331.13 physical facilities. I was looking at, there was a request in this section for kind of requesting a waiver for the lab. And I
Yes.
know kind of when it comes to one kind of managing your programs at an existing campus, right? You are limited to what is available to you on that campus. But I wasn't sure kind of how then, kind of looping back to the conversations of would this, and I guess maybe this is a question to Dr. Daniels, where I might need some kind of help here. Would the lack of cadaver labs impact, I would say, the student experience, hands-on experience?
Dr. Ellis, do you want to answer that?
Sure. I think this is a very subjective question, and you'll probably find people that say, yes, it does, and yes, it does not. One of the reasons that we decided to go with this is that we're an evidence-based institution. We thought that using technology in the classroom was something that was best fit for our needs. We're the College of Chiropractic Medicine. A lot of, not that we're a medical school, but a lot of our medical colleagues and institutions have gone with anatomages. There are some traditional standalone chiropractic schools that use, of course, cadaver labs, but our vision was to include using technology as much as possible. The feedback we received from the students, they've loved it. I have admission interviews with every student, and nobody ever has, asked me about that per se of a make or break situation. And then when we subjectively and objectively have end of course surveys, they all say they love the anatomage. We actually have 3 in one campus. That's quite a few in one building. So we collaboratively use this with nursing and PTA programs. So I think if anything, it's great because it pushes us into different physical buildings and resources, and we show the PTA students and nursing students different types of case scenarios. So I don't think it negatively impacts them.
Okay, just wanted to make sure. I know, I would say there's definitely, I would say different schools of thoughts in terms of approach, but I wanted to kind of just confirm, like, are you finding the current approach working, and especially if it's requesting I would say a waiver from this requirement.
Right. Additionally, there was a waiver with respect to our prostate and pelvic exam models. So I'm not sure if the waiver was with respect to the anatomy lab, but also within the application was the prostate and pelvic exam models. We're using silicone models, which requires a board waiver for that if it is to continue that way.
Okay.
This is Dr. Daniels. Just 2 quick questions. On the student faculty ratio, it commented on 1 full-time professor for every 15 students, yet in the lab and technique classes, it was a maximum of 24. Are there more clinicians in the lab, or what is that ratio? And then also, what is the location in California that you were looking at?
I'm unsure about the question about the location in California. I'm not sure if I had a question with respect to that. I'm sorry, I'm not understanding that question.
Oh, sorry, just location of the brick and mortar school for Kaiser University, or is this just a?
Oh, no, well, we don't have any, at least to my knowledge. I mean, our chancellor is Dr. Arthur Kaiser, and he's always looking at opportunities, but this is in the West Palm Beach and campus, and potentially if it's successful, it might be a program that's in the other, again, 20 different campuses throughout the world. But we're not looking in actually, at least to my knowledge, and President Nucci, if you're online here, to do brick and mortar in California.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yeah, I assumed, but I just wanted to kind of confirm that.
Oh, she's on and off, but if she comes back,
Whitney,
yes,
hello?
we can hear you.
Hi, thank you. I just wanted to add to that. This is for our West Palm Beach, Kaiser University College of Chiropractic Medicine location. We have no plans to expand into California at this time.
Thank you. I assumed. I just wanted to clarify.
And getting back to your lab question, so although we may have 24 students in a lab, what is done typically is the teacher will teach one group, because we have two labs right next to each other. They'll teach one group of students, so half of 24 is 12. They'll teach them something. They'll say, go practice. And then she'll do the setup, or he will do the setup of manipulations, the physical exam procedures, and then they'll rotate. So it's actually a very intimate setting, is that we're having this teacher, although it's not a different lab session, because that's kind of critical to our scheduling right now, to create multiple schedules or lab sessions, but we are teaching and then practice. And so the instructor is going back and forth with that, with the last little bit of that lab session where it's all 24 bodies working on one another, with the teacher being in there. We do have students that audit the class if they've passed it and they want to come back and relearn lumbar spine manipulation or cervical spine. We also have some federal work study students that may help, but currently, because we've only had one cohort of 24, which was this past fall cohort, is that we haven't had the need really at this point to take a look at multiple people in the lab session, because it's working really well right now. But I can imagine going forward, we are hiring again 3 new faculty in 2023, that those faculty will come in as well into our lab sessions.
Great, thank you. And if you're okay, just to kind of move it along, if you're okay that we open this up to public comment to see if anybody has any questions for you.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, moderator, can you please open the agenda item up for public comment?
Certainly. We are opening up the Q&A feature of WebEx to facilitate public comment. If you would like to make a comment, you can look for the question mark icon typically in the lower right corner of your computer screen. Type the word comment into the text box and click send. The other option is to raise your hand by clicking on the hand icon. And if you are a call-in user, you can press *3 on your phone to raise your hand. And I do not see any requests for comment at this time. Shall I close the public comment session?
Yes, please. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other discussion? And Ms. Walker, are you there?
Yes, I am trying to find my unmute button. Yes.
Does the committee or you have any other further comments or discussion on the topic?
No further discussion at this point. If the committee needs additional information reported back, we can bring the item back. If the committee would like to move it forward to the board, you can make a motion, but that's the decisions of the committees at this point.
Okay, so just to clarify, this committee can make a motion to bring the existing documentation forward to the board for approval or not. Is that correct?
Correct. At this point, so there was the initial review that we did, and we identified some areas where it wasn't meeting the prescriptive requirements within the regulation. So during the program representatives at today's meeting had countered and offered to provide additional information. So Sabina can also confirm, but at this point, the committee could make a motion to move it forward to the board contingent upon us receiving the additional documentation that was mentioned during today's call. Or if the committee would like to review it further, we could bring it back to a committee meeting. So we could either put a motion forward for provisional approval or just to bring it to the board, or we can bring it back at the committee level.
Okay. Ms. Knight, so I guess at this point I'd like to move it to the board contingent upon the additional documentation. So is that sufficient language to reiterate into a motion?
Absolutely. Would your motion be a recommendation for approval contingent upon the receipt and approval of the pending information? Or would you just like to recommend the entire application to the full board for consideration?
Well, I'd like to recommend provisional approval, but by the board and also contingent on the additional information that they said they could provide.
Perfect. So absolutely, the full board will review the entire file, and I'm sure your wonderful board staff and EO will be updating that memo with all the additional information that the school is going to be providing between now and the full board meeting. So your recommendation can be for your provisional approval by the full board, and all that additional information, when and if received, will be included in the updated memo the staff will provide for the full board.
Okay, great. So I'll go ahead and just reiterate that. I'd like to make a motion to recommend provisional approval to move to the full board and contingent upon the additional information presented or offered by Kaiser University.
Perfect.
And I second.
Ms. Cruz, can you call for the vote?
This is Sabina again.
Sorry.
That's okay. Did you want to, let's just double check on public comment now that we have a motion?
Great,
I just wanted to
thank
make
you.
sure.
Yeah. Moderator, can you open up for public comment again?
Absolutely. So
Thank
we've
you.
opened up the WebEx Q&A to facilitate public comment, or if anyone has anything to say about the motion, you may also raise your hand by clicking on the hand icon. And call-in users can click *3 to raise their hand. And I see no requests for public comment. Shall I close that again?
Yes, please.
Thank you.
Okay. Ms. Cruz, do you want to call for the vote?
Yes. Dr. Daniels,
Yes.
Jeanette Cruz, yes. And so that motion carries.
Great, thank you. Okay, so let's move on to agenda item number 5. And this is to review and discuss the possible recommendations regarding the chiropractic college curriculum requirements. And Ms. Walker, can you give us kind of start this off with an update as far as to where we are at, and also the public comment that was added in?
Of course. So the purpose of this agenda item today is to discuss the concerns that were raised by a chiropractic student at the October 3rd licensing committee meeting, as well as the October 7th and 27th board meetings regarding the clinical experience requirements found within California Code of Regulations, Title 16, Section 331.12.2. So within subdivision E of that section, as a requirement for graduation, each student is required to perform a minimum of 250 patient treatments, visits, including diagnostic procedures, chiropractic adjustive technique, and patient evaluation. The issue that the student brought before the board is that this requirement does not allow for any partial credit in circumstances where, after performing the evaluation and diagnostic procedures, the student determines that chiropractic adjustment is not necessary for that patient. And then to provide additional context on that, one of the board's pending regulatory proposals was approved at the July 2020 board meeting. The board approved proposed regulatory text, which is found within attachment 3 of this agenda item, that would instead eliminate these prescriptive requirements for applicants who matriculated after 2020 and instead mandate that colleges ensure all graduates have completed the minimum educational requirements identified in Section 5 of the Chiropractic Initiative Act. So for today's meeting, the purpose of the discussion is for the committee to consider the public comments that were received on Subdivision E of California Code of Regulations, Section 331.12.2, and discuss whether the pending regulatory proposal that the board has already put forward would be sufficient to address the issue, or if any further changes to the clinical component of the degree program may be necessary and should be discussed at the committee level. So with that, I'd like to turn it back over to the committee to discuss not only the public comment received, but the clinical or the proposal to eliminate all of the prescriptive requirements within that section under a future regulation.
Okay, great. Thank you. So I'll just sort of kind of lead this off. So I'm extremely sympathetic to the case kind of brought before us as far as, not receiving partial credit and doing some digging and seeing kind of what's out there and what the standard is. As mentioned before, like the AMA is moving away from number of years in colleges. So this kind of falls in that same flavor. And they're moving to EPAs, which is entrustable professional activities, because there was a gap between medical students and residency programs. And so that would sort of lead us to, okay, well, we don't really need a number per se, and we could take that prescriptive agenda out. However, there is within those colleges, in order to perform, say you had to perform 1,000 laparotomies before you would graduate or your residency program, but you may see, and typically this is the case, 4,000 exams before you're able to complete the 1,000 procedures. And so that's very similar to this 250 treatments that's including 3 components. It has the evaluation, the diagnostic, and then the actual execution of the treatment. So it's not surgery for us, but it is our manipulation, right? That is sort of what makes us who we are. So we may need to see 500, say, visits before we perform 250 exams, and that's reasonable. That is what's sort of in every single practice. Is not every single person that comes in that's going to count for credit is going to need an adjustment, but in that process, you are getting that clinical experience. So the problem is we don't have a number as to what creates a competent chiropractor in adjusting. Can they adjust somebody who has degenerative joint disease, who has, knowing the difference between someone who is hypermobile, and that takes time and process of seeing many different bodies. So we don't have a standard to sort of lead us as to how to define this and if we can sort of take this away. The other issue is how many would count for partial? So what if, somebody only did partial and was, never adjusting? They're not going to be a competent adjuster, and that is what makes us different than other professions. So I think we have things to discuss as far as it's a little more in-depth and complicated, because healthcare is changing, the medical schools are changing, we should be changing as well, and not necessarily attached to a number, but this number has been used for a really long time. And so, is this number even enough, right? We don't even know that question. Are students coming out competent as they should be? So I would like to open it up for conversation, because I think it's a bigger conversation. If we look at 1,000 being what's required of a medical student to perform, and say they may need 4,000 to get there, that's about 25%. When you add up the clinical hours and the adjusting, the treatments, were the last 2 categories, it was about 918 or 48 or something like that. and 250 is about 25% of that or 26% of that. So the student is getting, you know, more experience than the 250, but the 250 really is that diagnosing, we'll just say subluxation because that's the term that's been used. Joint position error and other terms, as Dr. Illes implied, would be probably more contemporary. But if we say subluxation, because that's been referenced, finding it, palpating it, diagnosing it, evaluating it, treating it, and then your post-evaluation. That's a very different scenario than somebody who evaluates, diagnoses, and then nothing happens. You are missing a component of that. So I think we need to discuss further kind of these questions and the components. And, you know, how do we decide how many count for partial? Is it 25? Is it 50? Is it 75? If we don't put a limit on that, is someone, you know, the truth of it is some people are not born adjusters. Some people don't gravitate to that. They gravitate to this field for the more holistic healthcare. There's many other things you can do in our profession than just adjust, which is a tool. So how do we ensure that somebody who goes sees a doctor of chiropractic, if need be, knows how to be competent in the thing that separates us from every other profession? So with that, I would like to kind of open it up for a more open conversation. And Ms. Walker, I don't know if you have any ideas on this since you've been on the board, and you know, I wasn't there for the recommendations or that conversation that happened with the previous board that was wanting to defer it to the CCE. So I'm going to kind of throw the ball back in your court and see if you have any input on this.
Sure. And kind of my response to that is, and beyond just the written comments received on the topic, we do have the pending regulation. It's not yet been filed, and it's ripe for further discussion by the board if it's appropriate. I would caution that with the pending regulation text that was previously approved, it's to strike it entirely. So if there's a balance there that the committee would like to discuss before proceeding with that process, we can gather additional research. We can have the discussion on whether it's appropriate to proceed with that regulation as it was envisioned in the text there, or if there's a medium where maybe deferring some of the curricular requirements or most of to CCE while retaining some authority over the clinical component, if that may be something that the committee would like to consider. We can definitely begin the conversation by reporting back with just what those clinical components are with not only chiropractic, but then looking at other, like you mentioned AMA, I'd be curious to know if there's any other health professions that you'd like us to bring back data on for what their clinical components are within their programs.
Yeah, I mean, you know, the closest, you know, is physical therapy. I mean, they do quote unquote graded manipulations. And so the model is a bit different, but I could see possibly, you know, investigating that. You know, I'm trying to think of, you know, as the doctor from Kaiser University mentioned, I mean, there is competency with motor skills and, you know, how are we ensuring that the public is safe with proper motor skills and to perform these adjustments or manipulations, and we don't, without a number, how are we going to, you know, are the schools inherently going to have, you know, regulations and checklists to make sure that the people coming out are competent? I mean, that may be the case. I just don't know. And for me, it just becomes a little bit more complicated when you look at the number of the visits and how many do we need. You know, 4 years is really just such a short amount of time as it is. It really just sort of sets the stage for you to, I think personally, to start learning. And so my concern is not having any guidance or, level that people have to meet, what that's going to look like for the profession in the future. Ms. Cruz, do you have any comments or on this?
I completely agree of kind of bringing together different, I'll say, professions for comparison and kind of what they're doing. I kind of earlier when you were talking through the different options of, right, the question of what is the right number, but also I do see the I do see the opportunity for more discussion on if there is partial credit, if partial credit is considered, if partial credit is being used by other what's it called, other boards or kind of other professions, right? Is there an up to? Is there a certain percentage, right, where there is a limit of some kind where there is an acknowledgement of, I would say, this gray area folks may fall into, but not at the cost of kind of what you're saying, the wider measurement that is being taken at the time. And even if CCE or anyone else is kind of looking at this as well.
Thank you. Also, before I forget, I don't know where in this particular case, is NUCA even taught in a core curriculum?
I don't personally have the answer to that question. I would have to research and get back. The materials presented in the public comment was that the individual would have obtained the training and they're being permitted to use that technique as part of their clinical hours. But I would have to report back if it was actually part of the core curriculum at the institute, or I believe the student themselves may be on the line and they could answer that question as well.
Yeah, I believe it's an elective. It wasn't a core, but when I was there, and I'm not sure it is now. So, that's also another issue. Ms. Walker, if I'm understanding correctly, the documentation that was provided as far as the California rules and regulations and the recommended for change on that document, what I heard you say, you had some concerns about holding this entire document up as far as having more of a conversation around the core curriculum. Is that correct?
So within the meeting materials, we have our attachment 3, and it outlines all of the proposed changes to just various regulations. Now, each of those can move forward on their own. We don't need to, if we wanted to modernize the approach to the educational programs, and there were certain changes within there that are non-controversial and the board's in agreement, we can move forward with those separately and then take the time to reconsider if that's kind of the direction that the committee's leaning, the curriculum requirements themselves, the 331.12.2. So some of those other areas which that's off the topic of this agenda today, but there is that ability to do that. So kind of what I'm kind of envisioning from this committee is if there's a desire to do a little bit more discussion and study on the proposal to entirely strike all of the curriculum requirements, which is what was approved in July of 2020. I would suggest, I don't know if a formal motion is needed, but I would suggest bringing that to the board for concurrence and then returning it to the committee to have that discussion. And then if there's other sections within the regulation that the board is comfortable moving forward with, they can give staff appropriate direction and we would proceed with the regulatory process solely on those separate sections. So I think this is something that could be presented to the board in January, the discussion of where do we go from here with the curriculum requirements if we want to move some and potentially have further discussion. I also would caution that with the regulations that are proposed with the college curriculum, to go from having entirely prescriptive requirements to essentially repealing them and not having anything, it's a pretty bold move. And then it's going to be difficult if the board later on changes their mind and wants to then re-implement. So it's better to just make one change and get it right the first time. So if the committee's has concerns or wants to discuss it further, that would be my recommendation.
Okay, well, I mean, for me, I mean, I feel this particular, I didn't have enough time to go through all the other changes. I did review it. But for me, what sticks out the most is this topic of the core curriculum with the 250 visits. And I think it really needs to be investigated a bit more and study. I mean, the entrustable professional activity study performed by the AMA was, you know, a 4-year study. And, you know, they're taking that amount of time to, and I'm not saying we need to, but they're taking that amount of time to really assess how to get their medical doctors to be competent and to bridge the gap between medical school and residency. They had satellite areas where they studied this, and they studied how to get that done. What was that process? What did that look like? And, you know, unfortunately, again, in our profession, we just don't seem to have the resources and or I mean, I think we could have the ability, but the resources to kind of really study what it is more evidence-based as far as our requirements and what makes a competent chiropractor. We just haven't studied it. But I think we might be able to glean some information from, you know, the AMA and that particular study. I do have a copy of it that I can forward as well. I could use help kind of going through. I think it's about 75 pages long, but also reaching out to, I would like the other board members' thoughts and kind of comparing other practices, you know, maybe even acupuncture. You know, the psychomotor skill is not the same, but it might, you know, acupuncture, physical therapy, the EPA study from the AMA might give us some information and some guidance as to how to move forward. And again, with all that said, I'm not against it. I think it's just a bigger conversation to make sure that we're protecting the public, and that when somebody sees a chiropractor, they're getting the care, the same level of care that they would get no matter who they see. Any comments, Ms. Cruz?
None for me.
Okay, so at this point, Ms. Walker, just to make sure I get it correctly, can I make a motion to move forward with the document except removing 331? Oh, we need public comment, which I will do. But I just want to make sure I'm clear. I can move that portion out for further study while moving the other forward.
So with this agenda item, it's limited to the curriculum, which is the section that you have the concern. So and Sabina can correct me if I'm wrong, but an appropriate motion I would say would be to recommend to the board that further study be completed on the proposed revisions to California Code of Regulations section 331.12.2, and then we'll bring that motion to the board at the January meeting. And during that meeting, it'll be a more comprehensive discussion of the entire regulatory text. And then at that point, we can discuss how the committee recommends that the board proceed with the remainder of the package.
Okay, great, thanks. So at this point, I'd like to, if there's no further comments, I would like to open it up for public comment. Moderator, can you open this agenda item up for public comment?
Certainly. And we are opening up the WebEx Q&A feature to facilitate public comment. If you would like to make a comment on the proposed motion, you can look for the question mark icon, typically in the lower right of your computer screen. In the text box, type comment and click send. The other option is to raise your hand by clicking on the hand icon, and call-in users can look for *3 to raise their hand. Does anyone have a comment? We do have a raised hand from call-in user 2. I'm going to send your request to unmute, and you can press *6 to unmute yourself. You're unmuted.
Talking Mumont. Yeah, thank you. I'm Falcon Lamont. I'm the student that brought this item to attention. There's a lot to discuss. I don't know if I could just, comment on everything in 3 minutes, but I guess one thing that stuck was the comment to do away with this item entirely, according to the Chiropractic Initiative Act. I'm sorry if I got that mistaken, but I think if that were the case, it would not be advisable to combine these issues, because there are students like me currently who have agreed to the current regulations and are in this current situation, and for you to strike the entire number, it would affect people who I think to strike the number entirely would have to apply to like probably a new generation of students, but I think this item number 5 should separately be addressed. I practice NUCA at the health clinic, and it's currently an elective at Life West. Next quarter, it is introduced as core curriculum. The reason why I brought this up back in August, I last adjusted my patient, and since August, bearing reevaluations and weekly check-ins. Since that adjustment, measurements have found through the protocol, and the protocol is it measures subluxation to 1/8 of an inch and 1/4 of a degree. In addition to supine leg checks and a subjective account for how the patient feels on that visit, and the pragmatic decision of not just me as the intern, but as well as the certified NUCA doctor on staff, found no subluxation detected and no adjustment should be applied. And we've been checking weekly since June, and
30 seconds.
we found no need to apply further force into the patient, and because of that, so one would say I'm producing good results, but the opposite is true. I'm actually being investigated for possible expulsion because I'm not producing the numbers that the current 250 dictates.
3 minutes. And I see no further requests for public comment.
Great. Thank you.
Should I?
Yes, you can close it. Thank you. And thank you to the caller, and the board can't comment on it right now. However, the board does have your contact information, and again, thank you for calling in and your comments. So at this point, I think I do feel, and I think Ms. Cruz, how do you feel about having more investigation on this topic?
Yeah, and I think especially, I would say, a lot of the, edits were from a lot of the folks on the current board, was not there for kind of the edits prior. I think it's just, I would say, giving a good refresh with the current board, kind of board discussion with them would be helpful.
On this
particular part.
Yeah, 331.12.2.
Yeah.
Okay. So can I make a motion would be for the board to have further study and investigation on 331.12.2.
This is Sabina. That would be.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely fine. We'll go ahead and refer it back to the board and then see where it goes from there.
And I second.
Ms. Walker, before do the vote on that, I mean, does that, I'm just taking out this is the only section that we're discussing, so the other is sort of left unaffected, is that correct?
Correct. Yeah, that's how we'll present it to the board when we bring it in January with additional background information and context for refreshers, given that the majority of the board members, as Ms. Cruz pointed out, weren't present when that initial approval occurred.
Okay, great, thank you. Ms. Knight, was that clear enough, the motion and then the second?
Yes, thank you so much for including this the regulation section as well.
Okay, and Ms. Cruz, can you call for the vote?
Yes.
Or should I do public comment again?
Ms. Knight?
I think we can call for the vote on the motion.
All right, Dr. Daniels?
Yes.
Jeanette Cruz, yes, motion carries.
And this was going to be a big, there's a lot of stuff to go through. So I just kind of wanted to pause for a second. And I believe, Ms. Walker, I just wanted to touch base because agenda items 6 and 7, I think there's much to discuss there. We also need to do the committee, get the meetings on the agenda, future agenda items, and public future agenda items. And so I'm looking to you for some guidance as far as being sensitive to time. Is it something that we should take 6 and 7 for a future meeting and move forward with the items that I discussed, or should we steam ahead?
Correct. Yeah, because agenda item 6 there on reciprocity was just going to be an initial discussion. Staff is doing quite a bit more research on that for a future meeting, so we can defer that to a future committee meeting. And then with inactive licenses, we can discuss some additional direction that the committee would like to see on that at a future meeting. I would recommend that we move to public comment not on the agenda, and then we could take future agenda items.
Okay, and then should we do, I don't have in front of me the agenda as far as scheduling for future, getting our meetings on the calendar.
Correct. We should be able to accomplish those 3 items before we adjourn, and then we'll table agenda items 6 and 7 for a future meeting.
Okay, and then just if I can say here, as far as agenda item 7, I think that, as you said, needs to be tabled because there's a lot more to consider as far as inactive, retired. Do we have the definition? What that regulatory language would mean if a retired, what they can and can't do. Some still want to do exams, et cetera. And there's a lot of public safety concerns. So that all needs to be discussed in that agenda item. Okay, so we'll move number 6 and 7 to a future meeting, and then we'll move to agenda item number 8 for public comment for items not on the agenda. And so, moderator, can you open the public comment section up for me, please?
Certainly, and we've opened up the WebEx Q&A feature to solicit public comment on items for future agendas. If you have something to suggest, you may raise your hand, or you may look for the question mark icon, type the word comment into that text box, and click send.
This is Sabina. I think this is public comment on items not on the agenda. Is that correct?
My apologies. You're correct. Yes.
Just want to make sure we're all on the same page. I thought I missed
exactly. Exactly. Agenda item 8, public comment for items not on the agenda. And I see no raised hands and no comments in the Q&A box. Shall we close agenda item 8?
Yes, thank you.
You're welcome.
And I'm sorry, Ms. Walker, were there any written comments sent in?
No, we didn't receive any written comments for today's agenda.
Okay, great. Okay, So moving on to agenda item number 9, future agenda items. Ms. Cruz, does the committee have any?
Yes, one from earlier, agenda item for insights for the different associations and colleges related to trends around license type preferences and kind of things they're seeing when it comes to active and inactive licenses.
Okay. And I wasn't sure where we were at on a previous meeting. We discussed, or I discussed wanting a survey sent out to the licensees on the suggesting a different fee schedule for inactive licensees. So I'd like to move that to a future agenda item as far as creating a survey draft, being transparent with the licensees as far as the kind of the financial stability of the board, where we get our income from as far as the licensees, and some sort of, yes, no, maybe as far as reducing the inactive fees, and that realizing that the active licensees may have to carry some of that load, and getting really the licensees, getting them to know where we're at, what the situation is. And, we have almost 1,000 inactives, potentially more inactives, and how do we keep them sort of in our ranks and not lose them from an overly high licensing fee, because some may be still working as far as in other areas, some may not. So I would really like to hear from the licensees at large, if possible, with a survey of explaining where we're at, what the numbers are, and who would be, in favor of a reduced fee. What would that look like? The first year is the same. The second year, it decreases, say to 75%, as the person is aging, their income is fixed, but we don't want to lose those members of our community. So I'd like to move that to a future agenda item. Is that enough guidance on that?
Yes, it is. Yeah, and that item actually moves as well with agenda item 7 on inactive licenses. So we'll compile and put that information together between now and the next meeting.
Okay, great. And I would also, we need to discuss renewal of suspended licenses and requirements for re-licensure. And I think this is an overlap with the CE committee. And also, I would like to, there's some question around informed consent and definition and regulation, and I don't know if, I don't know if there's a crossover with enforcement, as far as there was a comment on certain facilities only require an informed consent with something outside of conservative management. And I'm just not sure we fit into that category, because one of the definition is something that could cause, serious harm or injury. Then they need informed consent, but for basic procedures, informed consent is not needed. However, one of the tools that we use is manipulation, and as rare it is, that can cause, as it's in the literature, can cause harm in the person. That I feel the public needs to be informed, I think, across the board. So I would like to move informed consent, and let me know if that's a licensing or really more an enforcement issue.
I would say that it really falls within the enforcement committee, and we will raise that item to the committee chair so that they can put it on a future discussion item.
Okay, great. Thank you. And my final item was what Ms. Cruz identified. And then I assume we have on there the continuing the discussion of the 250 treatments is on the agenda as well.
Correct, yes.
Any other items for future agenda? All right, hearing none. Hearing none, let's move on to the final agenda item number, or almost the final, number 10, scheduling committee meetings for 2023. And Ms. Cruz, are you able to do that?
Yep.
Okay, so the suggestion is scheduling a meeting spring, summer, and fall of 2003.
Yes.
So if you're okay with it, I can lead off with some suggestions and just kind of get the ball rolling, and then we can see what fits in the schedule and if it's time-wise works with the other boards. Ms. Walker, is that okay?
Yeah, that sounds good.
Okay. So the first one, I know it says spring, is February, the last weekend in February. Is that spring enough, or is that still winter?
That would be fine. We just need to get one in between the January board meeting and ahead of April. So
Right.
February would be great.
Okay. So Ms. Cruz, I was looking at February, I think it's the Friday the 24th or around that time.
Let me kind of get into the right view of my calendar. There it is. So you said February 24th, is that correct?
Correct, or in that,
In that time frame.
it'd be Monday the 27th.
Yep, that works. I was making sure that the holidays, so no, we're good. So the 24th, similar time, you think?
Yeah, I'm thinking 10:30 might be a little easier for me. I don't know if that's okay with you and the staff.
That works completely fine.
Okay, so 10:30, February 24th.
Yep.
Okay, great. And the next one, as I was looking at it, sometime in July,
All right.
and I don't know if anytime around July 21st, 28th.
Is this, and just to clarify, I'm looking at the next board. So this would be, I imagine the desire would be for this to be before the July board meeting, correct?
The July board meeting, the general board meeting is July 20th.
Okay.
And so
So
I
would
was-
this need to be in June?
July. I mean, we have a couple options. We can do June. You could we have a board meeting July 20th. We can kind of just, I don't know if it's too much for staff, go back to back the 20th and the 21st, or we could do the 24th, or
Oh,
we could,
and I guess maybe my question is to Ms. Walker. Is
Yeah.
it the preference for our committee meetings to be a few weeks prior to the board meeting?
We do need a minimum of 10 days in advance, just due to the Bagley-Keene requirements. But since we've contemplated one in February, there's the option to place one in late April, early May, and then do one late July, early August. And then if that one fell after the July meeting, that's going to gear it up for the October board meeting. So we can either look at late June, mid to late June, or we could do one kind of almost immediately following the April board meeting, and you could go under that sequence as well. Whichever works better. The staff schedule is very open.
so it could work if we did mid to late June and then popped in again. Let's see, hold on.
Mid to late June would work. We just can't get too close to that July 20th date because we'll have Bagley-Keene issues on noticing the board meeting.
Okay, and what about like if we popped it earlier and then did after? So what if we did like a May 12th for one and then
Mhm.
after the July meeting in say late August?
We could do that.
Okay. Yeah, I'm good for May
Is-
12th.
You are? Okay.
Yeah. So let's
And-
say same time, 10:30.
Yeah, I mean, does that work for you?
Yeah, it does. That way I can keep it consistent with my staff of like, nope,
Yep.
this is my usuals.
Yeah. Okay, so February 24th, 10:30, May 12th, 10:30,
Mhm.
and then so the board meeting is July 20th. So that moves us into so sometime in August or early September.
Mhm.
Okay, so I have that I could do like on August 18th, or I could do a September 8th.
18 or September 8th. Let's do August 18th.
Okay, same time.
Mhm.
And Ms. Walker, those work?
Yeah, those all work for staff. We've got them written down.
Okay, great. Thank you, Ms. Cruz.
Mhm.
So agenda item 11 is adjourning the meeting. Okay, and the time is, what time do we have? 12:07.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll see you later.
Thank you.
Thanks, Miss.